Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's virtual educational program with Cancer Support Community Los Angeles. I am Edlyn Rodarte, and I am the bilingual program coordinator at CSCLA. I'm excited to welcome you to this week's webinar titled Optimizing Wellness During Cancer Treatment. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, Cancer Support Community Los Angeles is a premier nonprofit organization providing vital social and emotional support to families facing cancer, including patients, caregivers, and their loved ones, all at no cost. Our programs include support groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs such as this one. If you would like to learn more about services or watch past webinars, please visit our website at www.cancersupportla.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, please note that we cannot see or hear you. Your video and microphone are automatically disabled for this webinar. We will not be monitoring the chat room, but you may enter your questions into the Q&A feature at any time. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. We may not be able to get to all your questions today, but our presenter is invited to share their contact information at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome LJ Amaral. She is a registered dietitian who is board certified in oncology nutrition. LJ attended the University of Connecticut, where she obtained a Bachelor of Science in Nutritional Science. She went on to get her Master's of Science from NYU while subsequently completing her internship to become a registered dietitian at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan. She works at Cedars Sinai Cancer in Los Angeles as a clinical nutrition coordinator within research and is researching the efficacy of the ketogenic diet as an adjunct to standard of care therapy for CNS malignancies. LJ specializes in cancer nutrition for cancer prevention, during treatment, for survivorship, in therapeutic ketogenic diets, and in oncology nutrition research. Welcome, LJ. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Edlyn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to share some of my knowledge. I actually just celebrated my 8-year anniversary at Cedars Sinai this past week. So I'm really happy to talk about, the accumulation of what I've learned as a clinician-based practitioner in a cancer center for the last 8 years at Cedars Sinai, and how to optimize your wellness during your cancer treatment. So some learning objectives for tonight, just to learn about general nutrition guidelines for cancer patients, identify what we think of as superfoods for the brain. And I don't really love the term superfood, but we're going to use it. Understand the role of exercise in wellness, and review the role of hydration. So thank you, Edlyn, so much for my bio, but just as a little recap about maybe why you want to listen to me. I did get trained at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, and then moved out to Los Angeles for my job in 2015. I've been involved in nutrition-related research in cancer at Cedars Sinai Cancer since 2016. We have a pretty big phase 2 ketogenic diet versus the American Cancer Society diet with glioblastoma going on at our site that I'm in charge of. So I do specialize in ketogenic diets, and I am a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition. So I really just want to briefly touch upon why it is important that we try to be conscientious about what we eat, especially as it pertains to as you go through your cancer-directed treatment. And, food can have a lot of different charged emotions because sometimes it can be more difficult than other times to be eating normally, or maybe you want to eat more healthfully after a cancer diagnosis. There's a lot of things that are obviously going on, but there's a lot of actual science to support the fact that what we eat does actually influence our health. So there is a two-way talking street between our brain and our gut, or our microbiome that has a lot of different microbiota or bacteria that actually help to process our food. And some of those metabolites can actually go into the bloodstream and I guess you could say transform, but also change the different types of neurotransmitters that get fired and ultimately change the way that we feel about ourselves. And so physical health really is mental health. And so the way that we feel can be dictated by what we put into our bodies. So what I really preach is trying to avoid the highly processed foods as much as possible. And just to briefly touch on this point, when you think about sickness behavior, we all kind of act the same way when we're under the weather, or that when we don't feel well, we all kind of gravitate towards the same sorts of foods. Nobody really wants like a really hefty salad when they're feeling sick. You want like your mom's soup or something that's really soothing, and that's really influenced by these cytokines or inflammatory markers that happen when we're sick and we're going through cancer treatment. So sometimes it is hard to eat the way that you would like to, because it's just difficult because your neurochemistry is different. So what are highly processed foods? So it's also considered to be known as ultra processed foods. These are foods that have a lot of different additives so that they can remain shelf stable, and also they can be extremely addictive. They also tend to be lower in different types of nutrients, like fiber in particular, and different types of vitamins and minerals because of their processing and the way that they need to be shelf stable. And really, these are the types of foods that we want to try to limit as much as possible. So this can be anything that's packaged, like cookies and chips and crackers. Some breakfast cereals can be considered to be highly processed. Some frozen dinners, some lunch meats, sugary drinks. These are things that I would be considering highly processed foods. And there's obviously a spectrum, because none of us are, or I'm assuming none of us are farmers, and we're not actually making all of our food in our backyard. So there is some, level of processing that happens no matter how clean we're eating. So there is a spectrum. And so what we really want to avoid are the ones that are highly processed and ultra processed. And this is just an example of what that spectrum might look like. So in general, though, if you're feeling well and you're going through cancer treatment and you're thinking about, I just want to generally be more healthy within my life, and maybe you have a family member who wants to join in on you, these are the general recommendations that I would tell most cancer patients when I don't know anything else about them and there isn't anything else that's going on, which obviously doesn't happen, but here we go. We definitely want to avoid or try to limit the ultra processed foods as much as possible. So I'm not saying that you can't have these foods, but we want to try to have more of a whole foods approach as much as possible. So that would include more high fiber foods. So high fiber meaning plants, because plants typically have the most fibers in them, and the types of plants that we want to go for, it really doesn't necessarily matter per se in terms of, if you're eating only kale or only celery or only tomatoes. We're not talking about that. We want to have a big variety of different types of plants and really focusing on the colors in your diet. We definitely want to try to avoid any added sugar, especially from sugar sweetened beverages like soda, trying to limit the amount of juices that we're having that are sugar sweetened, and trying to limit the amount of added sugars that we're eating. So for instance, if you have the choice between a plain Greek yogurt versus a Greek yogurt that had fruit in the bottom, that fruit is typically a compote that has a little bit more of the sugar compote component to that. And so if we can limit the amount of sugars that we're eating with that choice, that would be my recommendation. Trying to choose lean proteins. So trying to choose things that have a lower fat content. So, the big reason why red meat gets a bad reputation is because most red meats are fatty. And when you grill fatty meats, they tend to drip into the fire of the grill, and then it would increase the temperature that's going onto the meat. And that will increase the charring that happens. Charring changes the iron molecules that are within the meat, and that's what's becoming cancerous. I think that there's a lot of different research that's going to be, I hope, coming out of the pipeline, looking at grain-fed versus grass-fed meat. I think that's still up for debate, but really choosing seafood if you can. So going over the smash fish. So those are going to be things like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Those are the fish that have a higher omega-3 content. And then plant-based proteins as well. So complete proteins like tofu or tempeh. Even if you have breast cancer, moderate amounts of soy is actually perfectly fine to have. Quinoa would be considered a complete protein. Chickpeas. So those would be my recommendations for proteins. And then trying to get as much omega-3 fatty acids as you can. So listed here are some examples. Omega-3s are important. We'll go over why in a little bit for brain health. But they're also very potent for reducing any inflammation, and they're also very good for your heart health as well. So really kind of tying this all together, enjoying that variety of plants, especially herbs and spices as well. Those are cancer fighters too within themselves. So definitely recommend that, if you're into garlic or onions or any type of herb like cilantro or rosemary or any sort of spices, curcumin, black pepper, definitely recommend that you use those liberally if you can. So other general nutrition guidelines is to really think about color. And I know I keep saying this, each color has a different type of phytonutrient within them that can be considered a cancer fighter. So the more variety of colors that we have, the more cancer fighters that you'll have in your diet. In terms of fish, because this is, of course, a hot topic of concern, and rightfully so, we want to make sure that we're using good choices when we're looking at fish. So these would be sustainable options, the ones that also have the least amount of mercury. So the best choices are listed here. And then if you can remember the acronym SMASH, those are going to be the ones that are the highest in omega-3 that will give you that extra benefit. The good choices are listed here. Those are a little bit higher in mercury. If you do have the luxury of having a consumer lab subscription, I definitely recommend that. They can go over the types of canned tuna fish that you would like to purchase as well for the lowest amount of mercury, because that is something to keep into consideration. And then, of course, the choices to avoid. These are the ones that are the least sustainable and also have the highest mercury levels. So when you're going through treatment, I hear a lot of the time about chemo brain. And actually at Cedars Sinai, Dr. Arash Asher has a class called Emerging Through the Haze, because chemo brain is something that affects a lot of people who are going through treatment, and it can be quite distressing. And so the symptoms of chemo brain are listed here. And it's really, trying to make sentences and maybe they make perfect sense in your brain, but they don't come out the way that you want them to, or you're needing lists upon lists to remember the things that you don't normally need lists for. But this is a real treatment side effect, and this is really caused by, or what we think is caused by, an excess of cytokines, which are those little inflammatory markers that also can change the neurochemistry in your brain that would also influence your food choices. And so, the best way to really combat chemo brain is to try to eat as well as you can. So trying to, when you stick to the whole foods diet, you're really limiting the amount of processed foods in your diet. Processed foods can increase the amount of inflammation that you're experiencing. So trying to eat whole foods, focusing on those omega-3s in particular as well. And then exercise and hydration are just as important. And so just to go over, I thought this was a really interesting graphic here, looking at the dimensions and how difficult it can be to treat something like chemo brain, and how many factors that can go into the way one brain cell works. and how, this can show up for people. So, nutrition can really help in healing your neurons and having them fire properly and have the right messengers go to the right synapses and create the right messages for your body to say, okay, maybe, I don't want to choose the nap and the processed food, even though I'm really tired. I'm going to take the extra effort to do X, Y, and Z, maybe meditate, maybe take a 5-minute walk, maybe eat half an avocado with a spoon, something like that, so that, you can really try to heal your brain from the inside out. And so I do work primarily with brain tumor patients. And so I do a lot of work researching superfoods for the brain, or foods that are really beneficial for neurons and brain health. And so what the studies and research have shown are that these foods are actually extremely beneficial for preserving your brain function and really feeding your neurons the nutrition that they need. I love the walnuts, especially because if you look at the graphic, they literally look like little brains. So if you can think that and put that in your back pocket when you're looking for walnuts, they're a great source of those omega-3s, and they're very rich in polyphenols, which is another type of phytonutrient that is a cancer fighter. But those omega-3s can really help with cognitive decline and helping with especially cerebral or brain inflammation or edema. The smash fish with tea at the end, because I also would like to include that tuna. Tuna is still considered a omega-3 fish that is beneficial. Just like I said, making sure that we're looking for the low mercury content fish, and those are really tasty too, with the smashed walnuts on top, or an olive tapenade if you like salt. Blueberries are also a really great source of polyphenols and anthocyanins. Those are helpful for reducing the amount of cognitive decline as well as cognitive function. Vitamin D rich foods or a supplement if you are deficient. We don't have a lot of vitamin D in our foods, but we can find them in mushrooms, fortified products like orange juice, or like in certain dairy-free milks, they have vitamin D. Canned salmon has vitamin D as well. You might need to supplement, especially if you are on radiation or other treatments that make you sun averse. I would definitely recommend trying to get your vitamin D levels checked and then supplementing as needed. But vitamin D has been shown to help with memory, as well as trying to, if you have low levels of vitamin D, it's been shown to have a higher incidence of dementia. So just avoiding any sort of cognitive decline. MCT oil is really interesting. MCT oil, it stands for medium chain triglyceride. It's very popular on the ketogenic diet. And it's really popular on the ketogenic diet because it's really just a length of fat. So most of the fats that we consume are considered long chain triglycerides. And so when they're long chain, they have to get broken down and cleaved in order to get transported around our body and absorbed. With MCT, it's the perfect size, so to speak, for our stomachs, where we don't have to go through all of that to break it down and absorb it. It can go straight into our portal vein, which is attached to our liver, to create something called ketone bodies. And ketone bodies are just an alternative form of fuel. So glucose or sugar is the primary fuel source that all of our cells use, especially our brains. And then if you're going on a ketogenic diet or a very low carb diet, or you're fasting at all, your body can create these things called ketone bodies that increases energy because they are an energy substrate. One type of ketone body is called beta hydroxybutyrate. And there's some interesting evidence with that, looking at that as a potential antioxidant, but that's a conversation for another day. So then we also, just to continue our list for some superfoods for the brain, green tea in particular, because it has this component called EGCG in it, or tea in general has something called L-theanine. Those have been shown to improve cognitive performance. Egg yolks, which I know sounds controversial, but they are actually quite good for us. And they are very rich in something called choline. Choline is a precursor for a neurotransmitter in our brain called acetylcholine. And so it is beneficial for us to be including egg yolks. They're also a great source of high biological value protein. And if you are someone who is a vegan or a vegetarian, or not a vegan, I'm sorry, if you're a vegetarian and you eat yolks or egg yolks, this would be a great source of protein for you. We have avocados, pepitas or pumpkin seeds, and dark chocolate. These are great sources of magnesium. Magnesium has been shown to help with migraine prevention or reduction. It helps with improving learning and memory. It can also help with muscles, and our brain is part of that. So it's beneficial for the body in general as a whole. Some people will take it before bed as a supplement to help them with their sleep latency or onset. Definitely something you would have to talk to your provider about, though, because magnesium does have a lot of interactions with medications. We also recommend red and orange plants in particular because of their vitamin A content. So vitamin A has a component in it called retinoic acid, which is a signaling molecule, and can help to create new neurons or new brain cells, which is always a good thing. And then Brazil nuts. So Brazil nuts are a great source of selenium. And selenium is a precursor for something called glutathione. And glutathione is an antioxidant that our body makes in our cells. And that antioxidant will help and scavenge any free radicals or cells that are uneven to make them even and prevent any other damage going around the body. So we definitely want to have a good balance of antioxidants in our diet. And definitely be cautious with using supplemental antioxidants always. So because there are quite a few interactions with certain treatments. So I think we as professionals underestimate the importance of asking people about their hydration and their hydration practices, because not only is hydration extremely important for, of course, flushing out your kidneys and making sure your heart is pumping, but I love using this analogy because I'm a picture learner. I like to learn by having visuals or analogies and stories. And this one typically hits, and I like to think about our body's hydration status as a difference in viscosity or thickness. So when we're well hydrated, our blood's thickness or viscosity is the same as, let's say, like some water with electrolytes. It flows through freely. You can, slosh it around, no problem. It doesn't leave any marks on your glass, on the walls of your glass. And that's the same thing with our body. When we're well hydrated, everything is pumping, our kidneys are working, our heart's working, we're getting oxygen to our brain, and everything is great. If we are dehydrated, meaning we're already feeling thirsty, because if we're thirsty, then we're already at least 1% dehydrated. I know these aren't super positive statistics, but it just is what it is. So if we are a little bit dehydrated, the blood viscosity goes to something like maple syrup or sometimes even molasses, depending on how dehydrated you are. And so if you think about having to pump molasses through your veins and your arteries and your heart and your kidneys and everything to pump oxygen and energy around your body, how much more effort it would take for your body to pump the molasses versus the water with electrolytes. It's so much more effort. And so if you are dehydrated, and I know sometimes water doesn't taste great and just hydration in general, it's a moot point. But that's also causing fatigue. It's also making you feel maybe a little bit more chemo brain, because we're not getting the nutrients, the oxygen, the vital types of detoxing that, our blood does when we're pumping that hard. So I do think that, if there's something that I can really drill in today is the importance of hydration in terms of our energy levels, our digestion, definitely how we have bowel movements, and just our overall feelings of well-being. So how do we eat well during side effects? I'm going to go over a few, with the caveat, though, that I really don't love the pressure that a lot of people feel that they get from family members or loved ones or even allied health professionals to eat perfectly. It's never going to happen whether you have treatment or not. So I just want to preface this. I'm going to go over some healthier options for when you're feeling, certain side effects. So if you are feeling nauseated from treatment, you can still eat healthfully. I definitely recommend trying to eat maybe a little bit more frequently so your blood sugars don't drop too low. So that would be, choosing foods with no smell. So things that are like right out of the refrigerator, trying maybe alternative protein sources. I'll hear all the time that like meat or chicken or fish just doesn't cut it. So maybe having, like more quinoa or more tofu. If you wanted to do some dairy, that's totally fine. Mint and ginger are also both natural antiemetics. So that can also help to quell some of the queasiness that you might be feeling. I love this picture. I recommend doing this all the time, putting some mint leaves in a glass of water and drinking through that. Definitely recommend making popsicles. You can also do the same thing. You can make ice cubes with like mint tea and have that be put into some water, some like hot water if you like that better. And then of course, I definitely recommend trying different hydration sources, meaning maybe try some seltzer water or like some San Pellegrino. Because I'll hear a lot of the time that the plain water kind of just like sits there and sloshes around and doesn't feel great. But I definitely think that if you can try to avoid going too long without eating, because there is quite a fine line between holding out too long from not eating because you don't feel well, and then eating because you don't feel well and not feeling better. So I get that there's definitely a fine line, but even if it's like a few bites of something, it likely will make you feel better. So something that, this can happen before you even start treatment is having this decrease in your appetite or feeling full pretty quickly. And I think that can be very distressing for people, especially if they are used to eating bigger volumes or quantities. So for this, really trying to choose calorie and nutrient dense foods. So meaning if you have a small amount of it or a small volume, you're going to be getting a substantial amount of calories versus something like if you were eating like a piece of celery, like a piece of celery is going to be like 10 calories versus if you had, like 5 olives or something like that, that would be like 50 calories. And it's probably this smaller volume. So trying to eat frequently, not waiting for your appetite to come. So I know it's kind of weird. It's like, I'm not eating because I'm not hungry. It's like, yes, but it could be that your signals are kind of off right now, So like we talked about with the cytokines can change our brain chemistry, change the way that we feel, and kind of trick us into saying like, we don't really need to eat, but we do need to eat. We do need to have nutrients. We do need to have building blocks. We have a high cell turnover. And so it is really important that we are giving your body the proper nutrients that it needs in order to continue to make those new cells and preserve your muscle mass and your overall function. So really trying to maybe eat by the clock instead of waiting for the appetite to come, or trying to take advantage of when your appetite is better than it is at another time. So like sometimes people will say the morning is terrible, I have no appetite, but by noon I'll eat well, like I feel well then, and then I don't feel well again at night. So if that's the case, then making lunch the biggest meal that you can. So liquid calories. So maybe that's like mixing two words together, soups or smoothies, or having things like if you're adding nuts or seeds to certain things, like you can have like chia seeds or ground flax seeds. Sorry. Cut up avocado, hummus, adding wheat germ, little things to add more calories to what you're already eating without adding a lot of volume. So constipation is such a huge issue for a lot of people who are on treatment. A lot of the medications are extremely constipating. I will tell you, Zofran and pain medications are the most constipating medications that you can be on. So sometimes it could be just that, you can be eating as much fiber and drinking as many fluids as you can, and you still need a little bit of extra help. And that's normal, and that's totally fine. Definitely try to go more than 2 days though without having a bowel movement. You really want to try to make sure that everything is moving. I think it gets really tricky to move things after 2 days. And then Plus, after 2 days, if you haven't had a bowel movement, you don't feel good, and it starts this like whole cycle. So if that's what I would say is my rule of thumb, is really trying to go every 48 hours, if not every 24 hours is best. So trying to make sure though that you're getting enough both hydration and fiber. So if you're increasing the fiber without increasing your hydration, it's just going to become this gel in your bowels, and it's going to be really hard to pass. So if you're increasing your fiber, let's say right now you're only eating, if you're tracking it, like 10 grams of fiber, or like a lower fiber diet, and then you increased it by 5 grams, you want to make sure that you're increasing it by a cup of water, and just making sure that everything continues to move. There is a difference between fibers, and types of fibers do matter. So there is soluble fiber and there is insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber adds more bulk to stool, and that's going to be things like Metamucil or bananas or oats. And then you have the insoluble fiber, which actually can increase your GI motility and the transit time, making things faster. And that's going to be anything that has the stringy fibers. So that's things like the avocado, celery, mango, sweet potatoes, pineapple. Those are really helpful for making sure that things are just moving and grooving. And then, of course, I can't stress this enough, though, the hydration is really important. Beans and legumes are also a great source of fiber, of course. Nuts and seeds that are listed, or not listed here, but like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, pepita seeds, sunflower seeds, those are all great. And then avoiding the binding foods. So foods that are made out of white flour products, like white rice or white bread or white pasta or white crackers. Bananas are actually extremely constipating. People are usually very surprised to hear that. So if you're struggling with constipation and any of those foods are in your diet, I would either take them out for now, or maybe try more fiber, but I would probably take out the binding foods as much as I can. And then, of course, if you have the opposite problem, you want to back off the fibers. So if you're having diarrhea or loose stools, you don't want to be having any fresh fruits or vegetables. You want to cook your vegetables. You might want to lay off the fruits, but you do want to have the banana. The one banana a day is actually quite good for keeping more bulk to your stool. If you're having a lot of losses, like more than a cup a day, which is like the size of your fist, in diarrhea, you want to make sure that you're having electrolytes to replenish that. So that's something like a broth, or maybe you're having Pedialyte or coconut water. This time you do want to choose the binding foods. So like we said, banana, sourdough bread, white rice, white potatoes, peanut butter is actually quite binding too. And sometimes you might need to be mindful of lactose. So depending on the type of treatment that you have, you can become lactose sensitive. And so if you take that away and your diarrhea gets better, then you might want to, avoid it for a little bit of time if it's in line with when your treatment ended, or if you're having radiation to your pelvis. I would just omit it for the time that you're getting radiation, and maybe a few weeks afterward, just to make sure that everything is okay, but you usually are fine to continue it after that. So physical health is mental health. And this is, I think, a really important slide, but I do understand that when you have cancer and you're going through cancer treatment, it's not always easy to just get up and go and exercise. And it's a lot easier said than done, especially if you have that type of like really, really, really strong fatigue that you feel it deep, deep, deep in your bones. The thing I will preface this with is, I know that these are recommendations, right? These are like the gold standard of saying, okay, we want to do 30 to 60 minutes. Of course, that's in a perfect world. Even if you are doing 5 minutes of any sort of exercise, it is 5 more minutes than you would be getting if you weren't doing it. So I think, we get in our heads a lot about, making it a big deal, or making it a bigger deal than it has to be for it to count. And that's absolutely not true. So any sort of exercise, even if it's walking to your mailbox and back, or doing physical therapy, like this is all super beneficial and has a big effect on your overall health and well-being. And so in the left-hand corner, though, we do have very strong evidence to look at exercise as it pertains to cancer-related fatigue in particular, the health-related quality of life, physical function, anxiety, depression, and something called lymphedema. And so we have aerobic exercise, and then we have resistance exercise. Aerobic exercise is going to be more so like cardio, and we'll go over some examples of what that looks like. And then resistance only would be training with weights or resistance bands, or I guess you could do some stretching. That would be, if it had some weighted stuff, that would be considered resistance. And then of course the combination is quite strong for most of them. And then we have moderate evidence looking at bone health and sleep. But all in all, I'd say this is a very positive slide. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be 150 minutes per week. That's what we typically recommend. So if you're doing that, 3 or 4 times a week in 20 to 30 minute intervals, you'll hit that. If you're doing it more vigorously, maybe you're in survivorship, we're looking at 75 minutes per week. And that's vigorous intensity exercise. And we'll look at what that would look like. But just to really talk about why this is important, I wanted to bring up a few studies that I think were really interesting. So the first study is looking at rats that were injected with lung tumors and those that did not have lung tumors, and they had access to a running wheel. And so basically what they found was those who had access to the running wheel, the exercise group here, they not only had a statistically significant lower tumor volume, but they also had a decrease in the number of tumors that were present. And you can see that here. So there's a significantly larger amount of tumors that were in the control group versus the exercise group. And the only thing that was different here was the amount of exercise that these mice were privy to. In a related note, there was another study done in 12 healthy men who did high intensity exercise interval training on a bike. And they did these 12 intervals at a 90% workload. And then they took blood samples from these patients. And what they did was they took the blood sample and they spun it down, and they took the fluffy coat on top called serum, and they applied it directly to a human lung cancer cell. And when they applied the post-exercise blood serum to the cancer cell actually decreased its growth, and it stopped growing over time. So not only does it have benefits with our quality of life, with our mental health, with our cancer-related fatigue, exercise can actually potentially help to decrease your cancer in general and be a cancer fighter in and of itself. So what does light, moderate, and vigorous exercise look like? So light and moderate exercise would be the ones that would comprise of the 150 minutes per week for the recommended exercise. So what I like to do is look at the differences in your breathing instead of looking at like your beats per minute, which is also what this is based off of, the number of beats that you take per minute with your heart. And so if you have no noticeable change in your breathing, you're taking a leisurely walk with your mom down the street, you're having a nice conversation, you're not going uphill, it's completely straight and flat, that I would consider to be something like light exercise. And then there's moderate exercise where you can have a conversation with someone. You can still have that talk with your mom, but you wouldn't be able to sing a song with your mom throughout the duration of your exercise. And then vigorous exercise is kind of like, you're kind of huffing and puffing. You got a really fast heart rate. You can barely say a few words without stopping to catch your breath. You certainly are not singing, but hopefully you are enjoying yourself. And something I like to just point out here is that yoga across the board is recommended for any sort of intensity with your exercise. And there are so many amazing health benefits to doing yoga. It's a really amazing mind-body connection. And just like we talked about at the beginning of the talk, we have that really beautiful mind-body connection with our mind going into our gut. And so there are a lot of really amazing benefits to doing yoga. And that's actually also being studied within cancer patients. So the last thing that I get asked about quite frequently when patients are going through their treatment is talking about supplements. In general, I would say I don't recommend any sort of vitamin or mineral supplement when people are going through their treatment unless they are deficient. So for instance, like a vitamin D, I think is pretty innocuous. Of course, you'd have to clear that with your physician and make sure that that was okay with them, especially if you're going through radiation. Some radiation oncologists don't like the vitamin D or any sort of supplementation, which is totally fine. But in general, because there are so many different interactions with different medications, whether it's chemo related or whether it's, a statin, there are different types of interactions that happen, and they can decrease the efficacy of your treatment. And so many are under researched, and they aren't regulated by the FDA. So in general, I try to shy away from supplements as much as possible. And the American Institute for Cancer Research does not recommend that people take supplements to prevent cancer. So there's no research to support any sort of supplementation to prevent cancer as well. And then just to close on a checklist from the American Institute for Cancer Research, or the AICR, we are starting a brand new month. We've only got a few more months left of this year, so why not try to do something healthy, try something new every day for the rest of this month. These are some recommendations that they have to all decrease your risk for cancer or risk for recurrence. So these are all different types of ways to increase your health and wellness, whether you have cancer or not. And I would be happy to take questions.
Perfect. Thanks, LJ. What a great presentation. And your little meme is funny too.
You're the good
So we did have some questions that came through during your presentation. So let's go ahead and get into those. We had somebody ask, because I know you touched on Brazilian nuts, how many Brazilian nuts per day should someone eat?
That's a great question. So it's going to sound so silly, but you only need like 3 to 4 Brazil nuts every day to hit your selenium recommendations. So you only need a few. So if you get like a big handful, you're golden.
Oh, that's great. That's good to know. The next one, it says, how much water should I be drinking and when should I be drinking it?
So a good rule of thumb for your hydration needs would be to take your weight in pounds and to cut it in half and then take that in ounces. So if you're 100 pounds, you want to go for 50 ounces of non-caffeinated liquids per day. I recommend trying to drink it, throughout the day as much as you can, but whenever you can, really. So I know a lot of people find that sometimes it's easy for them in the morning. They'll wake up and then kind of just knock back maybe 10 ounces right there, making sure you're having it, with your meal. I always keep a water bottle with me at all times. And I always tell people to kind of keep it near and dear, because if it's in your purview, you're going to reach for it more often than you would if it wasn't, or you had to get up and go get it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I always have a water bottle too. Thanks. I had somebody ask, is coconut water a good form? Is good for hydration?
Yeah, I think it depends. For some people, I think they might need a little bit more salt depending on how much they've had in terms of their losses. But I do think that in general, coconut water does hydrate people well, but I don't think it necessarily helps you to retain the water as much as something with salt does.
Oh, gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, to me. It says when it comes to fish, is tuna okay? But I believe you said that was okay. What about tilapia and sawi? Is SWAI?
So yeah, the canned tuna is okay. Definitely, make sure that you look for a low mercury can. Tilapia is also fine, and I'm not sure for the third fish. I'm unfamiliar with it, but if it's not if it's not a large fish, because larger fish tend to have the highest amount of mercury, then it should be okay.
Okay, that's good to know. Somebody said, because you did touch upon exercise.
Mhm.
How can I exercise when I get fatigued?
Yeah. And I think it's definitely one of those really hard conversations to have because you're like, oh, I know how hard it is to exercise when you're tired and you don't feel like it. So my recommendation would be to think about your week and think about the one day of the week where it might be the easiest to implement. So let's say you have treatment on Monday, and then you know that by Sunday, you typically feel a little bit better. I'm not saying you're 100%, right? But like you're feeling a little bit better than you did on, let's say, Wednesday. So you'd say, okay, Sunday is my day that I take a 5-minute walk, or I sit on my bike for 5 minutes, or I do like a 5-minute stretch. It doesn't have to be anything where you're taxing yourself, and I think that just like we talked about before, where we have this idea that it has to be like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, we have to be sweating for it to benefit us and for it to count. But any sort of activity at all would be beneficial. So it's one of those things too about fatigue. It's really hard to get up and start doing it when you feel that way. But when you do it, you realize it's quite literally the only thing that helps to combat that sort of fatigue. A nap won't do it, a food won't do it, a supplement won't do it. The only thing that's really going to give you the energy that you're looking for is a little bit of exercise.
That's interesting. So somebody asked, I did low dose chemotherapy and low dose radiation 4 years ago. I don't eat meat and dairy since then. However, my white blood count is still low. Are there any foods to increase my white blood cells?
Yeah, that's a great question. For white blood cells, it's a little tricky because there isn't, like, for red meat, we know, or for red blood cells, like we know, like red meat or like chicken or fish, those all can help to increase the red blood cells. With white blood cells, there isn't a particular food that helps to increase those counts per se. It's more so making sure that because you don't eat meat and dairy, I wonder if you're getting enough protein. You can absolutely get plenty of protein if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, but just making sure that you are getting enough protein, that I would say would be pretty helpful for making sure that your counts go back up.
Oh, okay. And then somebody asked, what about cheese consumption?
Yeah, cheese is okay to have as long as you're not lactose intolerant or anything like that. If you tolerate cheese, no problem, then you can absolutely include it. Just again in moderation, because too much cheese can increase your blood lipids, and so that's something that we still want to be mindful of too.
Okay. I had somebody who submitted a few questions, so let's take a look at that. Should extra sugar be avoided as strictly as possible, or is it okay to have that ice cream perhaps 2 times a week?
Yeah, I can appreciate this question. It's super nuanced. I definitely don't think that you have to be as strict as possible, so to speak. I think everyone in general, myself included, should be more mindful of, like added sugar intake and trying to not have it. 2 times a week, I think, is absolutely fine. Of course, it's also the portion size. So, if you're saying like, oh, I eat a pint of ice cream two times a week, then I'd say, hey, like maybe not. But if you're actually keeping within the serving size and you're having it 2 times a week, I do think it's fine. The thing about the sugar is, it's if it's in excess all the time throughout the many years. So
Oh no, I was just listening to you. So
yeah,
okay.
no, yeah, that's it about
Oh, okay. That's good to know. They also asked some of the fish choices that you pointed out said can trigger gout. And they said that most shellfish are very high in cholesterol. So what canned tuna is or are recommended ones? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Trader Joe's actually has a good one that I saw on the list. And then Shoot, what is the other one called? That brand. Oh, I'm blanking on the name.
Is mercury something that's listed like on the tuna cans?
And it'll say it's low in mercury.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. I will get you the exact label. I have it in my brain.
Someone said bumblebee, Starkist.
Those are well known and reputable, but I don't know if they're the ones with the lowest mercury. So, oh, Wild Planet. There we go.
I think I've seen that.
Wild Planet is one of them. Kirkland is one of them. And then, yeah, you can do Bumblebee or Chicken of the Sea. That was also the one that I was thinking of.
Chicken of the Sea. Okay.
There you go.
Great. Thank you. Somebody asked, for a man, the FDA recommends 35 grams per day of added sugar. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back into the other question, where I wasn't trying to go, but I'm going to go there now. Everyone's metabolism is very different, so I'll tell you from the 7 years that I've been doing ketogenic diet research, I'm having the same people. Well, everyone is different, of course, but I'm having the same diet go, or have people, all different types of people on the same sort of diet. And I'm looking at their blood glucose levels and their ketone levels twice a day. Everyone has varying levels of glucose and ketones on the same exact diet. So, I'm not a huge fan of like the one size fits all. And so in terms of like the 35 grams of added sugars per day, I do think it's a little bit generous. I do think it's a little bit high. I do think that if you have, like diabetes or metabolic disorder, that you should probably be going a little bit lower. So if you have the opportunity to work with a dietitian, I highly recommend it. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody asked what about breakfast cereal to process? They usually choose the one that has less than 8 grams of sugar and over 5 milligrams of fiber.
Yeah, I'm not mad at cereal. Like I enjoy cereal every now and again to myself. I do think that there are better options though, in the morning, that can provide a little bit more nutrition. But if that's your go-to, if that's what works for you, if that's what's like giving you joy too in the morning, there are so many worse options that I think it's totally fine.
That's good. That's good to know. Does you feel guilty,
Yeah, and that's the thing when I mean, like, there's with the preface of like you can't be perfect ever with your eating, and like we hold so many emotions with our food, especially when we're going through cancer treatment, that it truly breaks my heart when people say that they feel guilty when they eat or they don't eat, because I think that food can be extremely empowering if you choose it to be. Like it can be something that we have a lot of fear with, or it can be something that gives us a lot of hope and inspiration that we're doing something, really good for ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. And then one of the last questions here, but I am going to get to a few from the registration. Is canned mackerel okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
Next. So a few questions that we have, because we have a few more minutes left. Somebody asked, which I thought was actually a really good one, is how can healthcare professionals help optimize nutrition for cancer patients with limited financial and social support?
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly important conversation. I think one of the biggest things is that it's not talked about at all. And I think something that I think is really interesting is that I just noticed that our social workers started asking people about their financial toxicity, because I think that's a very real and extremely unfortunate reality of cancer patients. And then of course, eating healthy is a whole nother, tag on top of it. There are a lot of great organizations, though, especially within Los Angeles County, that do provide healthy nutrition at no cost to cancer patients. So I'm going to plug them. Project Angel Food, I love that organization. If you are on active cancer treatment and you are struggling to get nutritious meals, you live by yourself, you have difficulty with your finances, this is an amazing organization that will actually drop off healthy food at your doorstep once a week. They have all different types of diets too. They have a dietitian that also helps with their meal planning, which I think is fabulous, of course. But that's a resource. And I think just making your needs known. I know it's really difficult to be vulnerable and to talk about these things, but we try to make no assumptions, right? Or that's something that I try to live by. And so I don't know that there's a problem unless you say something. And so really advocating for yourself and making it known that, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me? Do you know of anything? Because I mean, 9 times out of 10, if we don't know what something that you can, refer you to, we know the person who we can connect you to make that happen.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's really good. Just speaking up and letting your healthcare team know. Yeah, and I think one of the last questions is going to be if people can have a copy of your presentation.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Perfect. So if you are interested in having a copy of LJ's presentation, go ahead and email info at cancersupportla.org, and I am putting that in the chat, and then we can go ahead and send you a copy. I want to thank you again, LJ, for such a great presentation. You've been doing this with us for years now, and we truly appreciate your information every time. And everybody who joined us, again, the link to, or the email address is in the chat. I also dropped the link to the Angel Food Project that LJ was talking about in case you have want to check that organization out as well. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.